been such a long while, but I pray that you've been doing well. We've had Mary and Hosea reach to us for the last 2 weeks, and I hope that you've had a good time. So karibuni sana to today. I have missed you here, and I'm trusting God that you'll have a good time in this session. Okay, so let's start with a word of prayer. Father, we thank you, we honor you, and we glorify your name for today. We ask you that Jesus, King of glory, even as we listen to your lesson, what, Lord, you have for us, I pray that Jesus, we will understand, and that God, we will input it, Lord, and practice it, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Okay, karibuni sana. Today I want us to look into something really quickly, and that's about boldness and about courage. So that's what we will be discussing today. But just before I go further, let me start with a quote that was said by a guy known as General George Patton. And he said that it's better to fight for something than to live for nothing. And in this life, if you living for nothing, then I think you are doomed for, what would we say? You are doomed for living an unsuccessful life, because I think for me, what I measure my success of life with is what have I lived for? You know, what significance has my life portrayed? What have I left behind? Whose life have I influenced? Whose life have I encouraged? And so forth. And so as we look into boldness and courage, maybe I'll start by asking you, what's the most craziest thing has God ever asked you to do, and you kind of felt, I am not able to do this, you know? I'm in no good capacity to do this whatsoever. And so through the Bible, God called people to carry out seemingly impossible and often ridiculous tasks. And every time He will call people to do this, you know, they would be amazed and ask themselves, what is gonna happen? You know, why is God asking me to do this? What does He want with my life? And the last time I did the lesson, we were talking about obedience, and we focused on Abraham and Gideon. And so today I still want us to delve a little bit deeper with Gideon. And so God went ahead and asked Gideon to do something for him. To Gideon, this task was, you know, impossible, and it was one of those ridiculous tasks, craziest tasks, if I would call them, you know, because you wondered, why will He pick on me? You know, I am young, as we had looked the last time. I am young, I am the weakest in my family. Why would God pick on me? And so most of the times, I think as young people, when we are called upon by God to do some of these things, we would, you know, most of us will probably give some of those reasons as Gideon did. You know, I'm unqualified, I don't think I can give the results that need to be given, I am young. But by the end of the day, God has already seen a seed in you, and that is what He is interested in birthing. You know why? Because he is our source. He's the one who created us, and so He knows, you know, I have, you know, there is something in Brenda that I want to birth. There is something in, you know, in Victor that I want to birth. And so God is very much interested in birthing the greatness in our lives. And so, to be honest, I also think that God, you know, went ahead and asked Gideon for the, you know, to do one thing that was very crazy for him. But in the midst of all this, God wanted to build courage in Gideon. And I think Gideon had not seen that. So let's read Judges chapter 7, verse 9 to 15. And allow me to read. And so during that night, the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up and go down against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterwards, you will be encouraged to attack the camp." So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outpost of the camp. Verse 12. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all other eastern people had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted, than the sand of the seashore. You can imagine, those are very many people. The Midianites, the Amalekites who are in the camp, all ready to go against Gideon and his people. So verse 13, Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. And so this person who is giving this dream was a Midianite. I need you to take note of that he was a Midianite. And he said, I had a dream. A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that the tent overturned and collapsed. Then his friend responded, this can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon. This can be nothing other than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into his hands. That was the response that his friend gave him. When Gideon, verse 15, when Gideon had the dream and his interpretation, he bowed down and worshipped God. And so, for God to birth courage in Gideon, he had him do something. And what he actually asked him to do was, I need you to go down into the camp area and eavesdrop. So the Midianite was going to share a dream, the dream that he had. And then guess what? His friend was the one who was to interpret. And these two are Midianites. His friend was to interpret the dream. And so in his interpretation, then Gideon had the opportunity to listen in to what it meant. And what the dream was all about. Yeah? And so he heard that this friend was so wise to respond that, this can be no one else other than the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, the Israelite, yeah? And that God has given the Midianites and the whole camp into the hands of this son of Joash, and that is Gideon. How amazing is it that God gave a dream to a Midianite man and the interpretation to his friends, for Gideon to hear this. Imagine if that dream came from another person who was not part of that land or who never lived in that land, and the interpretation again was given by someone who never lived in that land. As much as Gideon had been asked to go and eavesdrop, he may have never understood what the dream meant, But because the Midianites, what amazes me is that the Midianites all equally understood and knew that this land, this victory, this battle is not even in our hands, it is in the hands of Gideon. Why? Because the Lord has already enabled him. So the Midianites knew that God was going to use Gideon to defeat them. There was no mabishano there. They knew that God was going to use Gideon to defeat them. And the beauty is that by the virtue of Gideon eavesdropping and listening into the dream and the interpretation, his courage was birthed at once. Hear me well, that in verse 15 he actually said, when Gideon had the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down and worshipped God because he realized, wow, here is my victory. Because imagine that you are going to defeat people, if those people already believe that you will defeat them, then you already have a weak point to attack. Yeah, you already have victory in your hands. And so this is the case that happened with Gideon. He already had victory in his hands because God had already given the Midianites and the camp to him. And what am I to takeouts from this lesson? One is that when God gives you an impossible task, He never leaves you empty-handed. He never leaves you empty-handed. Remember, I mean, when you read Judges chapter 6 and verse 7 at the beginning, you'll realize that Gideon had his army, and then he was left with 300 men. And so God was not just asking him to go against the Midianites empty-handed. No, he already had 300 men. And even as you continue to read, you will understand and you will see that, he divided them into hundreds, and, they planned how they would attack the Midianites. So God never uses you or never leaves you empty-handed when he wants you to pursue a particular task. A very good example, again, we have is Moses. So when God wanted Moses to take out the children of Israel from Egypt, he used what Moses had. He had a rod, but Moses had never thought that, that rod would be very efficient for him. And what did God tell him? I need you to go and part the sea. And clearly there was a way for the Egyptians to just cross, for the Israelites to cross from the Egypt, and he got them from the hands of Pharaoh, and he would have never thought that what he had would have been useful for him. So in any task that God has for you, be assured that God never leaves you empty-handed. Paul says in Ephesians chapter 1 verse 3 that we have been equipped with every spiritual blessing to carry out what needs to be done. So God has not left you empty-handed, and God has you have a spiritual blessing in you. It's for you to know what it is, activate it, and then you will come out with the victory that you need to come out with. Second takeout is, that God proves himself in the little things so that we can learn to trust him in the big things. Often not, he will show up in those things that we will say they are very small, and then what next? Once he proves himself in those little things, then even as we go forth for bigger things, we will learn to trust him. A very good example is again with Joshua. When God asked Joshua to take his men into a battle that involved nothing other than marching around the wall 7 times. Imagine. If it would have been someone else, they would have maybe, gotten tired and resolved to go back to their homes. But the bigger thing that came out of this is that God had already destined victory for them. To someone else, them going round the walls, the city walls would have seemed to be very little, but the bigger thing is that there was already victory for them. There was victory for them. So what are we saying today? That God has called you out for a mission. And maybe to you could be there saying that this mission is impossible for me. This task is very crazy for me to pursue it, for me to do it. No. What God is calling you out for is that you may be bold. Please remember that because he has called you out for this task, you are not empty-handed. He has equipped you with every spiritual blessing. And that is the beauty of being God's child, that you have a gifting in you. So it's for you to realize what gifting you have, and to also activate it. And secondly, in those little things, as God proves himself in those little things, then we learn to trust him in bigger things. We learn to trust him in bigger things. And as I conclude, God displays his power in our lives in a way that strengthens and encourages us to go for bigger things. And that we see happened with Gideon, that he got his strength and courage in God. Just by him hearing and listening to God, he got the answer. He got his answer on what he was to do, and that was to go and eavesdrop and get to know how he would attack and get victory from the Midianites. And so in the same way, as a young person, there is what God is calling you out for. He has already shown himself to you. His power is in you for strength and for courage. And so it's for you to obey. it's for you to realize what it is, and also after realizing, may you activate it as the Lord desires of you. And so I pray that in this week and in the coming days, that you will desire to be bold and courageous, and to stand knowing that, for every mission that God has for you, you are not empty-handed, but rather you have been equipped with every spiritual blessing. May the Lord bless you, and I pray that you may have a very beautiful week, and a week that you will apply the lesson to the glory and honor of God. God bless you. Bye.